In today's episode, we are going to be talking about slow motion. You know, sometimes in skate videos, the tricks can go by really quickly, and slow motion is used to slow down things so you could focus more on the technical aspect of a trick or maybe make the edit more dramatic. So the basic idea behind slow motion is you want to shoot at a higher frame rate than the playback rate that you're going to play back the footage at. So for example, if we shoot at 60 frames per second and play the footage back at 30 frames per second, we're going to get a 50% slow-mo speed. In order to get a direct comparison, we set up 4 cameras side by side shooting at different frame rates. We had Ben do a quick flat ground trick so you could compare the differences. So for this first example, it was shot on a Canon 60D, and this was shot at 60 frames per second and played back at 30 frames per second, giving us a nice, clean 50% slow motion. Each editing program has a different way of changing the playback frame rate, and what I normally use is Adobe Premiere or Adobe After Effects. And I change the frame rate by clicking Interpret Footage and changing the playback frame rate from 59.94 to 29.97. This is nice because basically it's still the same exact file. You're not having to create a new file. All you're doing is telling the clip to play back at a different frame rate. So changing the frame rate in Adobe Premiere and Adobe After Effects is pretty similar, but if you're one of those people that's still on Final Cut Pro, another way to do it is to use Cinema Tools and to hit the Conform button, and you could change the frame rate that way as well. For our second example, I shot this using the HVX 200. We did all the slow motion in camera this time, where we overcrank the footage to 48 frames per second and it's playing back at 30 frames per second. The advantages of shooting like this is it's all shot in camera and it's an immediate slow-mo. And it's pretty cool because you're able to shoot at you're able to record it at different frame rates. So if you want to shoot it at 36, 40, or 48, or 60, you could do that. But the downside is you're going to lose the audio and you're going to have to use an external recorder or a second camera to get the audio. So the third camera you used is the Sony FS700, and this camera is really cool because you're able to record at really high frame rates and get really nice, clean, slow-mo images. This one was shot at 240 frames per second, giving us pretty much the equivalent of like a 10% playback speed. When you're overcranking with this camera and you're shooting in slow motion, the way the camera works is it's recording on an internal buffer, and basically what that means is the camera is always recording, and when you hit the record button, it saves the last 8 seconds of what you've been recording. For example, when Ben does his trick, he rolls up, he pops, he does the trick, lands, rides out of the frame, then I hit the record button and it goes back 8 seconds basically and saves the past 8 seconds. For the fourth camera, we got the VX out for you guys today, and unfortunately, it didn't really work out that well. We had some technical difficulties, and as you can see, we got a nice green bar effect with various glitching. That's awesome. I love this camera. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is ramped slow-mos, or time remapping as it's often known as, and this is something you always see in skate videos, and it's just another way of slowing a clip down where you're not slowing the whole clip down. You're basically slowing down a segment of the clips. I use After Effects to achieve this look because you could have precise control over the keyframes and create nice gradual transitions into slow motion and then back again in the regular motion. Okay, for this time remapping example, we're going to use the clip shot on the 60D, and we're going to drag it into a new timeline and position that like so. And we're going to add the time remapping effect onto that, and it's under the layer menu, time, enable time remapping. It's going to look and seem kind of confusing, but it's actually really simple. There are a bunch of fancy words that they use to confuse you. So right now the clip's in normal motion, and I'm going to add a keyframe where I want the slow-mo to start. And I'm going to start it, say, like right around there. I'm going to add a keyframe by clicking this keyframe button. And then I'm going to add another keyframe where I want it to peak in its slow motion point. And then another keyframe where I want it to continue peaking, so it has a gradual 50% slow-mo or whatever amount I want in between those two keyframes. And then I'm going to put the last keyframe where I want it to return back to regular motion. The next step is you're going to go into each keyframe and change the velocity and the speed of them, and how they react to the speed. So you control click the first keyframe and you go down to keyframe velocity, and you're going to want to change the outgoing velocity influence. I usually change this to around 30%. And what this does is it creates a 30% curve or like ramp into the slow keyframe. And then hit select, and then we're going to go to the next keyframe and keyframe velocity. And the top value is the actual speed of the clip. So 1 being 100% speed, 0.5 would be 50% slow-mo. So you're going to change that for the incoming and outgoing velocities. And you're also going to change the incoming velocity to 30% to correspond with the other 30% keyframe to make a nice gradual transition. Hit OK, go to the third keyframe, do the same thing. We're going to do 50%, 50%. Then we're going to change the outgoing velocity of this one to 30 to slowly transition back to regular motion. Hit OK. And then we're going to go to the last one, keyframe velocity. On this one, you can see it's back to 100% again. And we're going to change the incoming velocity influence to 30%. And click OK. And now we have all of our values on the keyframes. So now what you are going to want to do is go in and grab this last keyframe of your clip. Just select them all like this, or you could go in and click them with shift or whatever, but I usually like to drag and select that group of keyframes. And I grab the last keyframe as well as the last 3 of the ones I just made. And then I'm going to go into Graph Editor and select Graph Editor. Now you're going to see this nice little curvy guy. You want to click on this little lighter gray spot and drag to the right, and it's going to create a nice curve when you drag it out like that. And then you're going to want to deselect the left keyframe by holding shift and then dragging over it like that and unselecting it, and then repeat that process and drag this to match. And if you scroll over this part, you can see what the actual speed is, so make sure it's 50%. If you go like, if you're off, you'll see it says 52%. So you want to make sure that's nice and even at 50%. Select this one, and then you're going to want to drag out this last keyframe to make that nice ramp again, like so. So now you can see there is the regular motion at 100% right here, and then it slowly ramps down into 50% and stays even at 50% for a little bit, and then ramps back in to 100% and plays back regular again. Now you're going to have a nice ramped slow-mo clip. And it does the audio as well, which is really cool. The next step would be to select where you want your full clip to start, and you drag your work area start to that point and where you want it to end. You can do that either by dragging the handles or hitting B for beginning or N for N as a keyboard shortcut. So now this is the area that we're going to export out as a file. So we're going to need to export the file now by going to File, Export, Add to Render Queue, and you're going to want to go to click on this Best Settings option, and that looks good. Best quality, full resolution, make sure that your dimensions are correct and your frame rate's correct, and click OK. And then you're going to go to the Output module, and you're going to want to make sure to turn the audio on, and it's at 48 kilohertz, and you're going to hit Format Options and select the codec you want to use. I usually use ProRes 422 and hit OK. Then you click to output to, and this way you can name the file, so we'll call it Ben Nordberg Slow Motion Ramp. And we'll just save that to the desktop, click Save, and then just hit Render, and you'll render out your file. So now that we exported that and we brought it in the Premiere, you could watch, and there it is. It's a nice, clean, quick slow-mo. All these things like the keyframes and incoming velocity and all that stuff, they seem confusing now, but if you get into After Effects and just mess around with them, they'll start to make sense, and it'll be easy and you'll figure it out. One of the reasons why this shot looks nice and smooth is because in camera we shot the trick at 60 frames per second, and we're not relying on the computer to create frames or blend the frames. So if your camera can't shoot at a higher frame rate, most editing software is able to slow down footage in some sort of way, and it'll often do this by blending frames or creating frames, and it might not give you as fluid of a look, but it'll still slow the clip down. So as always, there is no right or wrong way to do this. It's just the way I learned how to do it, and hopefully some of this information can help you create awesome slow-mo clips. So yeah, have fun and just try not to overdo these slow-mos. Oh my God, good Lord. Oh, that was painful.